This happened in the spring of 2020, when the world had just begun to shutter its doors under the weight of a global pandemic. I was 28 years old, craving a respite from the crushing isolation, so I loaded my old Ford Tacoma with camping gear, food, and firewood, then pointed its bumper toward the Great Smoky Mountains. By late afternoon, I arrived at Cades Cove Creek, a secluded bend known only to locals and those willing to bushwhack past closed trailheads. A thin veneer of snow still clung to the pines. Despite the budding wildflowers, each footstep sounding a sharp crunch as I picked my way down the riverbank. The creek itself ran clear and cold, its steady murmur promising the solitude I desperately sought. I chose an alcove 50 yards off the main creek path, where a natural rock overhang formed a half shelter above the water's edge. I pitched my two-person tent on a flat platform of leaf litter, then gathered nearby deadfall to build a fire ring. Within the hour, I had a roaring blaze, its warmth a comforting glow against the chilling dusk air. I sliced locally purchased bratwurst over the stove, the sizzling meat smelling divine after days of instant noodles and cold sandwiches. Darkness arrived swiftly. The fire crackled and spit embers skyward under a canopy of stars, their cold light piercing the smoke. I wrapped myself in a quilt and lit a hand-rolled joint to settle my thoughts. But no sooner had I taken a long drag than my phone, tucked in my breast pocket, vibrated urgently. "Camping treating you right?" The message came from an unfamiliar number with a 304 area code, West Virginia. I sat up, heart bumping, as tremors of dread overtook the mellow buzz of THC. My fingers hovered over the screen as a fresh text arrived. "Beautiful creek. Saw you set that up." A third ping. "Wish I was there beside you." My blood turned cold. Outside, the firelight danced against the trees, but beyond its glow, the forest yawned into inky blackness. The only sounds were the whisper of water over stones, the low hum of insects, and my own rapid breathing. I tried to steady myself. My mind raced. Was this a cruel prank from someone I knew? Or had my professional disgrace in 2019, when a clerical error I'd made cost dozens of investors millions of dollars, finally followed me here, manifesting as a tormentor who tracked me even into the wilderness? I thumb-tapped back, "Who is this?" No reply. I stomped out the fire to prevent a wildfire and crawled into my sleeping bag, hugging my Sig Sauer P365 against my chest. The thin nylon of the tent provided little barrier between safety and nightmare. I turned on my headlamp, clicked, hit low, and opened one eye toward the vestibule. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, for the second time that night, my tent shook with the sound of footsteps crunching over the packed snow outside. They moved deliberately, each step measured and slow, coming closer and closer. I froze, every muscle taut. A flash of light blinded me for a heartbeat, an instant glow like a camera flash or a swirl of a flashlight beam, and a muffled click, as if someone had captured an image. Then the footfalls receded, pausing at the tent's zipper before withdrawing into the night. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a photo, the exact view of my tent's doorway, the wild little stump I'd used to prop the entrance flap, open just enough to let in airflow, visible in the foreground. A single text accompanied it, "Sweet dreams." I felt the world tilt beneath me. My body surged with adrenaline and rage in equal measure. I flung the tent flap open, stepped into the snow, and fired 2 warning shots straight up at the southern sky. The report of the P365 echoed through the trees like thunder. I heard a panicked scuffle in the distance, the final retreat of someone who'd underestimated how far I'd go to protect myself. I stood there, pistol trained on the dark pines, breath visible in the cold air. No footsteps returned. The night folded back into silence, the only sound my own ragged inhalations. Finally, I slipped back into the tent, locked the zipper, and lay awake for hours, heart pounding until the first pale light of dawn seeped through the nylon walls. When the sun Rose, the world felt changed, my fear replaced by a grim resolve. I packed silently, stalking the edge of Cades Cove Creek with my pistol in hand until I reached the road. By the time I found cell service and called the park rangers, my hands were numb from cold and assault, but steady as I reported the stalking, the photos, the shots I'd fired. 5 years later, I still keep my P365 close whenever I step into the woods. Here, I never learned who that voice was behind the 304 area code texts, whether it was a single person driven by vengeance or a group coordinating threats across burner phones. All I know is that night reminded me rawly, when you try to escape your past, sometimes it finds you even where you least expect it. I grew up in suburban Ohio, an only child living with my mom and dad in a house that felt far too big for just the three of us. But they always joked they never got around to having more kids. I was 15 the October this happened, smack in the middle of our annual weekend in northern Michigan. Each fall, my family piled into 2 cars and drove 5 hours north to Uncle Jim's 4-acre cabin nestled on the edge of a sprawling county forest. The house had 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, 2 for my brother Nolan and me, 1 for our 4 cousins, and 2 for the adults. Uncle Jim, a lifelong hunter and fisherman, had marked the boundary of his land by painting stripes of bright red on a line of pines. Beyond those trees lay miles of dark, unbroken wilderness. One crisp October afternoon, at the dinner table under low-hanging maples, Nolan, our cousins Marcus, 10, and Tyler, 9, and I hatched a plan. We'd camp out. Beyond the property line that night, dog-tired parents be damned. Grandpa and Dad, both tipsy on cider, didn't hesitate, shooing our worried mothers away with belly laughs as they hauled a massive tent, flashlights, and extra blankets into the woods. My sister and our girl cousins didn't get invited, which in retrospect was luckier for them. We trudged past the painted pines through a carpet of orange leaves until we reached a mossy clearing Uncle Jim called Deer Beds, a perfect natural campsite. By daylight, we pitched the tent, piled in our sleeping bags, then tromped back home to play tag among the oaks until supper. Over bowls of steaming chili, our mothers scolded our fathers for the late-night escapade, but Dad quipped he'd hear our screams from the front porch if anything went wrong, and that was that. After dusk, bundled in hoodies and flannel, the 4 of us tiptoed across the leaf-strewn ground, flashlights bobbing. Once inside, we arranged our lights in a circle and broke out a deck of Uno. The rules were shouted above the cricket song, laughter echoing off the canvas walls, the game passing the time until Nolan slid a draw for and gloated, "Watch me. Win again!" Then, cutting through the night's hush, a distant scream rent the air, a woman's blood-curdling wail so human and terrified it froze our laughter, mid-cheer. Hearts thumping, we stared at one another. "Probably a fox," I whispered by reflex. Foxes in Michigan mimicking human screams is a stubborn old rumor, but my voice wavered. Tyler's small face went ashen. We all nodded, trying to convince ourselves. Moments later, closer and louder, came the scream again, urgent, agonized. The tent walls quivered with a rattling that felt almost like a physical blow. We clicked, off our flashlights and dove for our sleeping bags at the edges of the tent, huddling in darkness. Every footstep outside sounded impossibly loud on the carpet of leaves, and even a snapping twig triggered fresh terror. Then, rapid, crunching footsteps directly outside our tent door, running, stumbling, ending in a piercing, ear-shattering scream that pressed the air out of our lungs. The tent shuddered as if gripped by giant hands. We all screamed at once, terror shredding our voices. I yanked the zipper free and dashed into the woods, Nolan and the cousins hot on my heels. Branches lashed at our faces. Moonlight glimmered on terrified eyes as we bolted back toward the distant glow of the cabin. I could hear heavy breathing. Behind us, ours, and something else like lumbering pursuit. But I refused to glance back. I just ran until I burst onto Uncle Jim's porch, gasping, soaked in sweat and leaves. Our whole family was out on the lawn, flashlights in hand, faces pale in the lantern glow. We explained the screams, the violent shaking of the tent, the terrible shriek. Panic seized everyone. But when I glanced back up the dark tree line, I could see only mottled shadows among the trunks. Uncle Jim and Dad grabbed their rifles and, vanished into the night. Their muffled shouts echoed back, but returned fruitless. By dawn, we carried the tent back to the cabin, each of us haunted by the memory of that inhuman scream. We never camped in those woods again, didn't even play outside after dark for years. I still don't know what screamed in the Michigan forest that night, or what beast or person could shake a tent so violently. I only know that some corners of the woods are darker than any night, and some regrets follow us into the branches and never let go. I've always loved the quiet escape of camping, just me and the wilderness, far from cell service and flashing city lights. 2 years ago, my dad and I set out for a 3-day fishing and hiking trip, deep in the Ozark Mountains of northern Arkansas. We'd picked a state park nestled beside the White River with rugged trails, hidden waterfalls, and miles of peaceful riverside campsites. By day 1, we were in heaven. Cool breezes, bright green trout dancing in sunlit shallows, and evenings spent roasting hot dogs over crackling campfires, trading stories with other families. But on night 2, everything changed. The park rangers had told us our campsite would be the only one occupied that night. Sparse bookings in midweek often left half the loops empty. Dad and I were proud to have the whole area to ourselves. After a long afternoon hike up to Hawksbill Falls, we returned to our site, a neat little clearing shaded by white oaks, and built a roaring fire. We laughed as we roasted s'mores to gooey perfection, and I passed Dad my small flask of bourbon so he could toast the sunset. By 9 o'clock, the sky was ink black, stars glittering overhead, and our firelight the only flame for acres around. Dad tossed another log on the fire and asked if I wanted to smoke a little pot, so we shared a joint and settled onto our folding chairs. I lay back, listening to the river's soft burble, toads croaking in the underbrush, and the occasional snap of a twig when some nocturnal creature ventured too close. It should have been peaceful, but the moment the joint died, a heavy dread pressed down on me. The woods felt suddenly smaller, the darkness closing in. Then came a single, thunderous crack, like a giant tree crashing. Only it wasn't a tree. It echoed from across the river, maybe 200 feet away. One snap isn't unusual. Logs shift constantly. But a second crack, then a third, each louder and closer, booming in deliberate rhythm, froze us in our seats. Dad's brow furrowed in the orange glow. "What the hell?" he whispered. We grabbed our flashlights and swept the beam across the riverbank. Nothing, just brush and rocks and dark water. Then came the third crack, only 10 yards off, deep in the thick pines behind our tent. My heart thundered. Dad aimed his light that way and saw, well, he didn't see anything at first. But then the beam swept past a vague, hulking shape among the trees, something tall, maybe 6.5 feet, completely still, so dark against. The black woods that its outline was almost impossible to trace. "Nobody out here except us," I said, voice unsteady. "Right?" Dad didn't answer. He cocooned his baseball cap lower and shone the light again. The figure remained motionless. Then, fourth crack, so close the ground seemed to vibrate. The person, or thing, was circling us like a predator, stalking our firelight. My blood ran cold. The easy camaraderie of father-son camping vanished in an instant. We unceremoniously dumped our chairs into the tent, snatched up our sleeping bags, and tumbled inside. Dad zipped the door behind us and groped for the small knife he always carried in his boot. We crouched in the dark, only the tent's flimsy canvas separating us from whatever waited outside. A low vibration filled the air, a humming that wasn't wind or river. It felt like the forest itself was buzzing with life. My ears rang. Dad whispered, "You hear that?" I nodded. nerve screaming. Then came a hideous cry, half human, half animal. A low, guttural wail that pierced the night and reverberated through my chest like a blow. It sounded like something out of a nightmare, something monstrous. We pressed ourselves deeper into our sleeping bags, terrified to move. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement through the mesh window, a swaying branch, a dark shadow passing too slowly to be a deer. Then another blood-curdling wail right outside our tent, as if it wanted us to know it was there. The tent walls shuddered under heavy footsteps, like giant hands slapping the canvas. Dad clutched that little knife until his knuckles turned white. Time lost meaning. 5 minutes felt like hours. The humming turned into a low growl, and I promised myself I wouldn't let my dad see me cry. Finally, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. Silence descended so complete it was deafening. We stayed huddled in darkness, too shaken to speak, until dawn's pale light crept through the tent flap. We emerged bleary-eyed to discover our fire reduced to cold ashes. Half our logs snapped in two and scattered around the pit. In the morning stillness, the woods looked innocent again. Deer tracks in the mud, bird calls in the canopy, nothing to hint at the terror of the night before. Dad and I packed in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, and drove home without another word. 2 years later, I still wake in cold sweats thinking of that night. Dad won't camp by a river again, and neither will I. We never told the rangers, never pressed for answers. We were too ashamed, too certain they wouldn't believe us. And maybe we would have seemed crazy, two adults threatening by the dark, with no footprints, no broken trees, no proof. Just the memory of a presence, that unholy vibration, those cracks, that alien scream, reminding us that some places in nature are meant to stay empty.